Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. We bring Bitcoin news, hot topics of conversation, and deep dives into a variety of Bitcoin topics to you weekly. We are Coinbits, a Bitcoin financial services company. Check us out at Coinbits.app. This recording is for informational purposes only. No investment or legal or any other advice should be drawn from this content. And as always, consult an advisor before making any legal or financial decisions.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is a Bitcoin and Chill Friday. Appreciate you guys joining us here and listening in. Today, we have a really awesome panel for you guys. We have Christopher and Matt from TVP. It's a venture fund, and I'll give an introduction about them in a second. We also have Chase from Impervious. And if you're here now, you likely know what Impervious is, but I'll also give an introduction of Chase and Impervious a little bit later. But first, allow me to introduce Coinbits. So Coinbits is a Bitcoin-only financial services company. Check us out at Coinbits.app. Nothing discussed in this conversation constitutes investment, legal, tax, or any other advice. We are not your advisors. This is for informational purposes only, and before making any decisions, be sure to consult an advisor. Now, we have recently reimagined our entire app experience on Coinbits. We've rebuilt it from the ground up. The user experience has been drastically improved, guys. Check it out. Across the entire platform, we are confident you're going to love it. But hey, even if you don't, especially if you don't, actually, we want to hear from you. And to invite you guys to do that for a limited time, we have a no-fee Bitcoin if you use our Bitcoin Roundup feature to buy Bitcoin. So check it out, Coinbits.app. We have always had no spread, and we have minimal fees to keep our platform service running and cover our costs. But now those fees for a limited time are zero. And honestly, what is better than free Bitcoin DCA? So check it out, take a look, join us, Coinbits.app if you haven't. A couple more plugs, if I may, real quick. So we also write a weekly newsletter that keeps you aware of all the key Bitcoin news of the week. It goes out every Thursday afternoon. It's a fun, hilarious, I think, informative and short read. 5 minutes, you catch up on all the happenings in Bitcoin news, because who can keep up these days, especially if you've got your head down like Bitcoin entrepreneurs, like Bitcoin builders, and you're building. So check it out. The link is in our bio. And finally, this space, it's Bitcoin and Chill Fridays. We do these weekly. We always have different guests. We always have different topics that are related to Bitcoin current events. And so we'd love to have you guys as regular listeners, regular participants. We really also like to have any questions or thoughts throw them into the bottom right-hand corner comments box. It tweets about the space, so it gets good visibility for the space. It also allows you to interact with whoever we have as a guest that week. So check out all those things. Check out Coinbits, and we'd love to have you guys as regular listeners, regular readers, and regular users if you like our service. Now, about our guests today. So we have a couple of really awesome guests from a variety of different backgrounds. And for this week, we're talking about Bitcoin and entrepreneurship, and we're talking about building on top of Bitcoin. And we're talking about how building on top of Bitcoin is very different than building on top of the fiat system that exists in the world today, and what those differences might be. And so we're very honored and we're very humbled to have some of the biggest names in Bitcoin VC join us here today. So Christopher and Matt join us from Trammel. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Trammel Venture Partners, where Christopher is a partner and Matt is the investment operations lead. And Trammel Venture Partners, TVP for short, is based in Austin. They're a venture capital firm focused primarily on investing in highly technical seed and early stage startups or Bitcoin native technologies, but they also invest in applied AI and security and privacy technology. Now, recently they've focused and actually doubled down on funding founders who are building on Bitcoin. One of those companies that they've decided to back is Impervious, and we have Chase here, who's a co-founder and CEO of Impervious, to represent the founder side of what Bitcoin venture capital looks like. Now, with all the drama in the crypto world these days, we thought that it would be imperative to share with the plebs what a behind-the-scenes look at the world of VC looks like, how that works, what's different about Bitcoin-focused venture capital, what a typical due diligence process for backing any kind of company would look like, especially if it's a Bitcoin one, and not to mention any specific ones where that may have failed. What white space exists for Bitcoin entrepreneurs to pursue, the idea of low time preference as it pertains to investing in Bitcoin businesses, and all that and so much more. So this will be a very informative, behind-the-scenes, open, honest conversation about all those topics. And we'll also get to hear from Chase about Impervious, what their offering currently is now, how he approaches building on Bitcoin, what it's like to be a Bitcoin founder and have the ebbs and flows of Bitcoin price volatility impact you as a potential entrepreneur. Maybe Chase, we can also get into your personal journey as a Bitcoin builder and how you got here and what you're looking forward to with Impervious. So all that is my spiel as an intro to the conversation. Christopher, Matt, Chase, do you guys have any thoughts, questions, concerns as we enter the conversation here?
No, that's a great overview. And again, thanks for having us. So we're happy to be here today and talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and building startups and a Bitcoin.
Awesome. Fantastic. We're excited for this. And honestly, I think, especially in the events of the past, we've had this scheduled, honestly, since what feels like a year ago now in Bitcoin world, when the Impervious browser was available for the public and the latest launch. And so that's how long ago we had this conversation, at least attempted to be scheduled. And so obviously the events of the past month has threw a wrinkle into the direction of our conversation.
It's been a wild 30 days, that's for sure.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So I want to start on the venture capital front. Christopher, maybe this is the best question addressed by you. Tell us a little bit about your motivation for building a Bitcoin specific venture capital firm.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good one. The why, the rationale, and I'll just give you the quick 60-second version of our background. My business partner and myself, we've been around since the early days in Bitcoin, and Dustin specifically was a day one person. And so over the years, the promise of Bitcoin became reality. And we've always had this idea that due to network effects, due to exponentially larger adoption, due to its inherent sound monetary and freedom, some philosophical underpinnings, that Bitcoin must necessarily win. And over time, that's played out. And we've done things, you've talked about some of our other investment areas, applied AI. We've looked at a lot of privacy and security deals. Certainly, philosophically, Dustin and I both are lifelong privacy advocates, very oriented toward that. But to your question, Bitcoin has always been our North Star. If you think, as we do, that Bitcoin has already won the battle for the internet's base monetary layer, and that definitely is our view, you want to be very, very methodical, very careful to make any changes to the software that makes Bitcoin function as a network, versus I usually make the contrast with the traditional Mark Zuckerberg move fast, break things, Silicon Valley approach to crypto, we'll say, in this kind of broader quote unquote crypto ecosystem. We've always felt like these are fantastic test nets. Go elsewhere, break things if you must. Just please, for the love of God, don't break the internet's money. And that's Bitcoin for us. And so that's setting the context to say this. It's because of that methodical, very careful, low time preference. Even just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't really the time to launch a dedicated Bitcoin focused venture capital fund series. The deal flow was much more sporadic. It was only in 2017 when SegWit, which was a technical prerequisite to the Lightning Network, was merged into Core. And then, of course, for quite some time, channel capacity was really experimental, very thin. But over the last few years, that it really changed. And so December 2019, an investor in what's now our second fund, the Bitcoin Venture Fund, had nudged us and said, "Hey, Christopher, why have you and Dustin never done a dedicated Bitcoin venture fund?" I said, "Well, it just wasn't really time. But thanks for the nudge, because deal flow has definitely been ticking up. And I think it's just about the right time." That was just before COVID. So we didn't form capital in the middle of that sort of chaotic process. But a little later in the year, we went to the market to put together the first of the Bitcoin Venture Fund series. And so that kind of brings us now. So a lot of the answer to your question was really about the business needs to have a dedicated investment mandate of this very high specificity focused on founders that are dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin protocol stack. So I'll stop there and happy to dig into this a bit more.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, thank you for the background. And it's crazy that it's only been just a couple of short years, going on almost 3 years here since you've started your Bitcoin specific fund, and how times have changed since the early 2020 time period. And it's almost like we live in a completely different now. Many Bitcoin VCs are essentially, like you alluded to in the beginning, your primary thesis, your foundation is that Bitcoin has won and Bitcoin is the future. And what does that mean? You're kind of almost like you're living in the future now in a way, right? Because the world, by and large, has still not realized this yet. And you see that in traditional markets. You see that with the FTX debacle and the fallout from that, which who knows how long that will take to play out. But being in venture capital in general just means that you have to be on the cutting edge of what the world is going to look like. And it's especially so in Bitcoin. And really foundation, be honest, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, foundation is you're basically betting that any company you invest in as a fund will grow with Bitcoin. And so you must stay on top of what's happening with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin space, the Bitcoin protocol, developments in Lightning and other kind of technological and technical aspects of Bitcoin itself in order to be able to predict and invest in the future. And so it's almost like 2 steps ahead in a way, traditional venture capital, isn't it?
You're very thoughtfully putting together my job description, which is to peek around corners and make some educated guesses as to what the real market gaps are, what the market needs are, and how that translates from this deep technication and opens up new possibilities. So yeah, it's a challenging job description, but it turns out we really love it. So we get to think about where the world is going. And as a side note to venture, this is to the degree there is alpha creation in the broader venture capital startup landscape. That's where it comes from. You're not going to get paid by doing what the herd's doing, which is really funny because with all this asset price inflation and just billions of dollars sloshing around the startup ecosystem, it's created this unexpected, perhaps expected, depending on your orientation, herd following. Everyone wants to pile into the same deals and that sort of thing. So in a weird kind of day-to-day conundrum, if you're right and you're seeing something that no one else is seeing, that means that you're by definition alone for a while until the world starts to unfold in your direction. And so, yeah, but hey, it's a hell of a fun job. So we just love it.
I'm glad you enjoy that and find venture in your job where you're trying to predict what happens next. And that's obviously a hard job to do. But hey, we appreciate you for it. And it empowers people like Chase to create exciting and new features and products and really create the future that we all want on top of Bitcoin. So thank you for all that you do. Now, let me ask you something that I think is probably top of mind for most people in the space and probably beyond. Take us behind the scenes, right? If you're a venture capital firm and you're looking to invest and someone like Sam Bankman-Fried comes your way and says, hey, we need money, we need to raise capital. What does that process look like? I'm going to venture a guess here that most of the people that are in the space and most people who are going to listen later are probably not in VC world themselves. Maybe there will be a few, but what does that process look like for due diligence specifically? Like when you go and you find a potential investor, what does the process look like? What do you look at? Take us behind the scenes, and really the follow-up question to that is how could there be so many people and so many different companies and so many different big names involved in this FTX debacle as creditors or as investors that will have missed what is apparently now appearing to be a complete failure of oversight and due diligence?
So I'll unpack the first part of that question, and we can leave FTX for just a few minutes because that's the really important part, at least for our day to day, and probably to some of your listeners that are curious. Maybe they're thinking about building a company and they want to build it on Bitcoin. What does it look like? I think it's game. I think historically in venture, there are these trade firms that live up on Sand Hill Road in the Bay Area, and they benefit by creating a mystique where you get the meeting at long last, and then it's mysterious what the conversation's happening underneath the hood. And I like to draw a distinction. Obviously, we think we have some edge or we wouldn't be doing this in a competitive environment, and we don't necessarily spill all the beans on how we're thinking about market view. But in terms of the founders, the entrepreneurs that, by the way, we wouldn't exist as an asset class if traditional lenders knew how to underwrite the risk. So these are actually our customers. And so it really should feel like a conversation. We make it our job to be super available and reminding people, hey, we're here. We invest so early that we like to have a conversation, ideally well in advance of when a company is really at the investable moment. And so since we are thematically super focused on the Bitcoin protocol stack, we're constantly thinking internally about what might happen. And part of that is really why I say conversation. The founders are typically pretty brilliant and they're seeing something about the market shape that is very unique in their prior experiences. And so to be able to come in, just like sit down and have a chat and think about what's going to happen is really how we like for that kind of relationship to start. And then moving forward, when there is an investment opportunity, sometimes it could be too early for us, or on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes if it's a really big growing company, maybe it's a little late for our way. But when it's in the Goldilocks kind of moment, then it should feel like a partnership. Once we get through the particulars of a specific deal or investment opportunity, generally it's early enough in the company's life. We're on the same side of the table. Think of it as a partnership from both perspectives, both for the founders that we invest, also our investors that are investing with us. We like it to feel like a partnership. We're really thinking about longitudinally building content and that sort of thing. So to the degree it seems mysterious, hey, let's kill the mystery. Just reach out and have a chat. Me or my colleague, Matthew Snows, who's on the chat with us today, and think about what you're building and why you're building it, what the real opportunity is, and that sort of thing. I think hopefully everyone aspires to have some small amount of a superpower. And I think thinking about and framing problems is probably one of mine. And I definitely come to Bitcoin with a strong set of market views and some theses that are in my hip pocket. And so that thought partnership and really framing things are where I feel like it can add value. By the way, even if it's not necessarily a fit for investment, there's a whole lot of things, especially around Bitcoin, to be built that aren't really companies per se. And this is a bit of a sidebar, but that also needs to be built. And we're super aware of it. And people in our network can help facilitate it. So things, for example, we are yet to catch up with competing platforms on developer tooling, but that's not really a company per se, but actually must get built. And so facilitating some of those, helping find people to join teams that are working on open source project. It's just really a very integral part of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So thinking about what those needs are and helping identify them. And then even if it's not an investable opportunity, helping to support teams as they grow, that we just make that our job. It's because we're citizens in the Bitcoin world as well as investors. That just happens to be our day job. But at the end of the day, we all work for Bitcoin and find a way to help move the needle for everyone else.
I would just add that we exist to serve, on the one hand, founders like Chase, and on the other hand, investors. And by virtue of being Bitcoin only, like we literally exist to serve both sides of that table. And specifically in these bear markets, we are here to be a constant source of capital. And when a Bitcoin founder talks to us, we don't invest in anything else. You mentioned FTX earlier. We see something that's not a Bitcoin only company. Okay, great. Yeah, we're definitely not investing. We don't need to do a call. So we spend all of our time with Bitcoin and we monitor the rest of what's going on in the tech world, which includes generalist crypto. Obviously, we're staying up to date on what's happening, but we know where we are and are not going to invest. And we're only mission aligned, talking with people who understand. We already understand what Bitcoin is and that we need to build on it. We don't even have to have that convo. We just go straight into, okay, great. Well, how are you thinking about this part of the business?
And to build on what Matt and Christopher were saying, from a founder's perspective, a mission focused, it particularly differentiates it, I'd say conventional or typical, say generalist technology, early stage venture fund. When you have a mission focused fund, you're going to view it through a different lens. And I was just speaking about this earlier where someone had asked me about some of your favorite investors and what differentiates them. And I was like, look, I use TVP as an example where their experience and the lens to which they approach venture is derived from their own personal experience as early Bitcoin pioneers. And people sometimes abuse the word pioneer, but Dustin Trammel was the second person ever to use coin and to run a Bitcoin node. So Christopher is very early and Matt is 4 years old. No, I'm joking. So it's important to understand it's a different dynamic. And one of my first conversations with Christopher, we were talking about his first or second conversation. And it was less of a pitch than exactly what Christopher was saying. So if there's anyone else building in the room, this is I think a useful anecdote, which is we were talking about what we were building. I think at some point, and I was maybe a little too comfortable, and I had said, look, we'd love your support. It was less of a pitch. I said, look, we'd love your support, but we're building this shit anyway. And Christopher laughed, but it was a genuine, sincere connection. And I think that's something a lot of times you see kind of dog and pony shows, or sometimes from the outside, you have, whether it's Silicon Valley, you get this, it's been industrialized, right? It's almost like there's this process of the pitch and people have roles, and because of Shark Tank, that has not been our experience at all. We've built relationships with like-minded people that have complemented us and guided us. We don't have all the answers and no one does, but having tremendous partners helps you get from, dare I say, 0 to 1, but definitely to a point where you can make it real and you can do it faster and in like a positive reinforcing atmosphere, which is not always the case. I mean, there are a lot of general purpose venture funds that make a lot of investments, well over 100, 200 out of a series of a couple funds. And like, good luck keeping up with 300 investments. Capital as a service has a role, but each fund is distinct. And that's certainly not been TVP's, our experience with TVP. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Chase. It was really nice.
Yeah, of course.
That's an awesome story. I think that's hilarious. And I think that perfectly, that interaction, Chase, and thank you for sharing that. That interaction is exactly what Bitcoiners would expect of other Bitcoiners when they're building something or when they're talking about an idea of any kind, let alone a business and let alone something that is hopefully going to be as impactful as we all think Impervious can be. That's really good to hear. And I think it definitely stands, in complete contrast to what else might be happening in the typical venture capital world where, clearly there's just it's fiat, right? There's capital misallocation all over the place. There is seniorage and there is obviously work that should be done that isn't being done just because the money flows so easily. And that's what Bitcoin fixes, right? Hard money allows for the good capital allocators to continue to prosper and to build products and services that delight their customers and that the world needs. Whereas capital misallocators get punished severely in a hard money environment. And situations like we have with, I won't go into FTX if you guys don't want to, and that's fine. But situations like that, if they happen on a hard money standard, there is immediate fallout. There is no, you lose as an entrepreneur, you lose as someone who funded that potential venture. And obviously the customers lose as well, but it's less systemic of a risk on a hard money world. And so thankful for Bitcoin for allowing us to hopefully transition to that world where hard money abides and fiat goes away and all the impact that we expect Bitcoin to have specifically on a Bitcoin business side of things will abound. Let me ask you guys another question on that note. So talked about a very loose process, Christopher, and maybe Chase, you can also weigh in from a founder's perspective.
Not sure you said loose, but yeah, go ahead.
The idea of the unknown, right? So there's a lot of, obviously, I don't think the unknown part is not how Bitcoin is going to be in 5 to 10 years. That's relatively, I think, people in this space. That's the common ground that we all share. But in practical terms, right, when we're talking about fundraising and you're trying to just very practically like build a team or build a product or try to calculate what your expenses might be, does having Bitcoin as a backbone for your business or building on top of Bitcoin or the volatility of Bitcoin, I guess more broadly, does that impose any challenges that you wouldn't necessarily have in a fiat system? That number of fiat anyway goes up constantly.
My answer may or may not be surprising. I think I'm a very pragmatic person when it comes to the answer of how does Bitcoin fit into the process and volatility fit into the process of building companies. And necessarily some companies that are building in this space have to have Bitcoin as part of the operating capital of their business. And that's really how I see it. Imagine you're building some kind of novel liquidity provisioning company that's riding directly on Lightning rails. You can't manage that business without having Bitcoin specifically. Think of it as almost like capital equipment. It's how the network functions. And so you have to be careful about the way that you're deploying it. Investors don't put money into companies with the intention of that money not being invested in the company in terms of internal uses of funds. In this way, though, Lightning companies in particular and Bitcoin layer 1 companies that are doing high transaction volumes need Bitcoin. And certainly right now, I've been flagging this, that I never thought that we would get to a moment where, literally I did a smash buy in the last week of a chunk of Bitcoin and I sniped it just below 16K. I didn't think we would ever be here again. And so for me, that was on a personal level, that was exciting. But just having the kind of some longitudinal experience and say, hey, what is the amount of Bitcoin that we're going to need to fuel this next line of business that we're super excited about over the next 18 months? what does our Bitcoin position in the balance sheet look like? Because we have to have that. And if we're going to need 50 Bitcoin over the next 18 months to operate that part of our business, thinking again about it in terms of capital equipment, now's a better time to buy that than perhaps 24 months from now or a little later. So that's just my approach to it. And it's not meant to be necessarily idle capital. Obviously, venture rounds are typically thinking about 12 to 18, maybe slightly longer timeframes, and that's meant to be into productive use. People are expensive, and you obviously need very capable engineering, which is some of the most expensive. And so it's usually going to hiring and lots of new internal useful R&D and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's how I think about coin on a balance sheet in a startup context. And for me, it's just, what do we need to build the business? And in our case, that happens to be Bitcoin for a lot of these kinds of companies.
Chris, that's a very thoughtful answer. Thank you for sharing your thoughts there. I wonder if it's a little different on the founder side. So where you're the one that is on the hook and the money comes sometimes with strings attached, and your long-term vision is clear, but your short-term operations might be slightly different in attention. What do you think about that, Chase? How do you think about it as a founder and someone building in the Bitcoin ecosystem, the short-term volatility, specifically Bitcoin's price?
It's an interesting thought experiment, holding assets in or a majority of your assets in Bitcoin, and it's going to apply differently. I mean, I know a number of, dare I say, a lot or most of some of the most talented founders right now building in Bitcoin, and they're all over the map on how they hold assets. I think a lot of it comes down to their specific needs. Generally, it's a positive thing. It's a little less about volatility of operating capital, though I can't speak for everyone. And then the opportunity Bitcoin Lightning specifically provides, instant service, permissionless payments. Like, whenever you bridge these arbitrary moats in these different jurisdictions, it's going to provide a larger customer and consumer base, potential user acquisition and engagement. And you can do it with incentivized Tor, with Bitcoin Lightning, with a really powerful community behind you. Like, watching Impervious grow just over the last month since it's been public or openly released out of beta, it's been awesome to see different. At one point, Brazil was our second largest market. And then somewhere in Southeast Asia, I don't even want to mention, it's very interesting to see if you provide a tool that's not just a nicety, it's not just an ethos, but it has utility every day. Market adoption can guide, like in the demand from the markets, can guide development and cool stuff. So yeah, I don't think there's, let's say, downturn of capital or at the price of, short of some other surprise, like I said, about short-term operating. That's just up to each founder. But generally speaking, I think it's more of an upside for utility use, borderless, instant settlement, censorship resistant internet money. It's great.
Awesome. Good to hear that. I think it mirrors what you would normally believe as just a regular Bitcoiner, let alone a builder on Bitcoin, right? As you have to, in the famous word of, I think it was Preston Pish who might have first made mention of this, which is you just have to have what you need to be able to operate and be able to sleep at night. And so as long as your exposure to Bitcoin, the asset, differentiating it here from Bitcoin, the network, is responsible in a way that you're actually able to build sustain, then you're in good shape. I think we had the Coinbits all hands team meeting just prior to this space. And the interesting part about this is we're also Bitcoin only and we're an on-ramp. And so we have been approached before, Coinbase has been approached before by the crypto people. I won't mention specific projects, but the financial incentive to dabble in crypto for short-term gains is very real, where, it speaks to the DINO, right? Decentralized and name only aspect to a lot of these cryptos, where you get approached by very prominent members of a specific project and they come and tell you, hey, list our shitcoin and we will bring X number of users to you. And that's real financial short-term incentive that, people who are not necessarily builders on Bitcoin or in the Bitcoin space may not be aware of. But like, that short-term financial incentive to dabble in other things is real. And I think it takes a certain level of self-awareness and long-term vision and low time preference to actually be able to build a fundamentally Bitcoin-only financial services company, or building on Bitcoin only without dabbling into other tokens and stuff. And that's obviously very different than your traditional VC model where you are just looking for short-term fiat gains. So I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's I really like this question because for me, it's pretty clear. Like so many things in life, much of our day-to-day experience is a trade. And this is, for me, philosophically, one of the most important trades that someone might consider. And sure, short-term gains, the seigniorage, money printing through tokens, and you mentioned a key word, decentralization. I'll say it this way. Here at TVP, Matthew, Zach, Dustin, all of our advisors, we're able to actually attract people that want to work with us because we have a strong sense of mission. We feel like we're doing work and we're in a hurry about it because I'm a technologist and I love technology. I like to tinker, I like to try new things, but I'm also old enough and have enough experience to recognize that technology itself is amoral. It has no intrinsic sense of values. It can be used for good. It can be co-opted, used for evil. And where I see the world going potentially is a place that is not a world that I want my friends and family and loved ones to live in. So Bitcoin is very important. And so what is that trade? Well, the trade, it comes down to decentralization in terms of always everywhere, a kill switch that some would-be tyrant can actually take the power away from you. And so it might seem like gains in the short term, but when you see this bigger picture that you're actually, why are we doing this? Well, I'm one of those dirty capitalists they talk about on Twitter sometimes, and I'm certainly doing this for financial gains, but with a sense of mission, with a sense of values, alignment, and purpose, it's so much more powerful. And so throughout our portfolio, there's a common thread and different facets and takes on these kinds of things, but it's very important that the actually only decentralized network is Bitcoin. And if you're thinking about other trade-offs that go along with that they're important trade-offs and things for founders to consider, such as career risk, opportunity cost. If you're assessing on that basis, I would say Bitcoin, the only platform that you have any kind of certainty to. So those kind of decisions, if with a little bit of poking around, become really easy. But trading the future that everyone in the free world believes in, for me, in those kinds of terms, it's just not where I would ever want to spend my life. I get it. There are these short-term financial incentives, but these problems, even just 2 or 3 years ago, were much more pronounced because, I remember seeing Joe Kelly and Drew Vansall just so early and seeing the bright orange future at Unchained Capital and struggling to really, in a sea of crypto noise, to tell that story and to say, go for it. They didn't have a lot of investors that were aligned. And so now that there's not just us, but there are AngelList syndicates, others that are actually providing capital, I think that those trade-offs are actually less important now because there are professional investors that can support you longitudinally as you're building your company and building from a place of mission and values. So I don't want to get too soapboxy, but this stuff matters to me. It matters to TVP a lot. And I think we all should just take some responsibility to build the future that we believe in. And a free future is the one that I care most about.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll add is that when you talk about other VCs focused on the short-term games, that this goes all the way back to what the Bitcoiners are like always saying, that we live in a world where most people don't know what money is, even though it controls their lives. And this venture capital industry itself really blew up in the 1980s. I mean, it has roots from colonial America, but it really blew up in the 1980s when we were untied from gold and on central bank issued fiat notes. So really a whole industry and sector that's never had an understanding of what money is, why it was a beneficiary of the expanding money supply. It's no surprise that most VCs don't understand. It's no surprise that most people don't understand Bitcoin. It's not actually a knock on most people. There's a lot to understand, and it takes a lot of knowledge from a variety of areas to come in to see Bitcoin. But when you see Bitcoin the way pretty much everyone in this room probably does, we're not actually sacrificing anything. If we're all correct that this is the superior monetary network, Christopher has a great line that Bitcoin's already won the race to be the world's internet's base reserve currency, the value transfer mechanism that was always missing from the internet. If you knew from the beginning HTTP was going to win and not the 15 other potential protocols, TCP/IP, you would have massive alpha. So everyone in this room, we're all making this bet that we know that this thing has the superior properties from all sorts of angles: Austrian economics, cybersecurity, nation state resistance, game theory, blah, blah, blah. But if we are correct, we're not actually sacrificing. We are going to be potentially much better off by having known that from the beginning and stayed laser focused on.
Really good point there, Matt. And Christopher, thank you for your insights on that. And the passion with which you speak is completely expected. And you talk like a Bitcoiner, your work shows it, and what you guys do at TVP shows it. Now, Chase, you haven't commented on this, and I think you're on the other side of that table where, I don't know if you guys have been approached, and you might have been approached, maybe especially in the early days, about potential support for altcoins and what that looks like.
I can't wait to hear Chase's answer because I know the answer to this question.
Oh, well, yeah, there are specific anecdotes, sure. But if we just start from the foundation of, it depends on the mission and function of what you're building. So if you're serious about building sustainable infrastructure, if you're trying to solve a problem, it's funny, not only am I not tempted by it, but it's more important that we take an objective approach to problem solving and like a systems-based approach. And we think, hey, look, like for us, Bitcoin Lightning and the peer-to-peer internet standard is self-evident. It's a self-evident winner, and it's the only way to approach censorship and surveillance-resistant systems and to have robust, sustainable infrastructure. So there's not really an allure if things are brittle. And Bitcoin, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I think you did. Bitcoin, the asset you hear a lot about, but Bitcoin, the network, it's the greatest system of distributed compute in human history. It's fault tolerant, robust, and you can think of Bitcoin Lightning as like the liquidity layer for Bitcoin. And that real-time liquidity layer can be used for all kinds of things. You get essentially 300 bytes for free. Within those 300 bytes, you can use a signaling command and control layer, but really it allows any node operator and anyone in the world to ride on the shoulders of giants and to take advantage of the greatest fault tolerant, censorship, surveillance resistant technology in the world. And so from just like, it's overused a lot saying first principles, but like, if you're serious about building things and if you're seriously trying to build real hard tech, the other things aren't really an issue. I think that's only a distraction if your head's in short-term hand wait, more importantly, like trendy fads. So, kind of like what Christopher was saying, the way we saw the world, the reason we founded Impervious is we genuinely think that we've become to digital tyranny and the creatures of big tech. And it need not be that way. Like over the last 20 years, we've seen great consolidation of the internet technology and technology service providers, and it's provided fewer tools for discretion and control by the individual to have any, not just discretion and control, but even knowledge of where their data is stored, shared, and how it's routed. So for us, it is a world we want to see where the individual is at the center and where use of your data isn't exploited, but it has to be incentivized by a third party that provides some type of novel value proposition. We can completely address the incentive structure later, but yeah, and whenever you want, we can talk about a little bit more about Impervious and what we do and why we do it. But on like, you're serious about having tools that you want to use in a future that you have any sense. I mean, it's literally called Impervious because we want people to feel less vulnerable to externalities. And those externalities can be political, they can be at work, they can be social, technological. But like Christopher mentioned, we touched on quite a bit. The great consolidation has created these service providers that can serve as essentially kill switches. And even if they're good actors, data that's duplicated is just waiting to be exploited. So they can serve as proxies for the agendas of third parties. Or if you think about it, like imagine if every time you send a letter via USPS, first thing the post office did after it got to the mail sorting facilities, they open your mail, they copy it, and they put it on the shelf forever in perpetuity, just in case. And then they send your letter. And that is the current state of digital communications. It is first sent to a third party. Maybe they control the keys, maybe they don't, but ultimately the data is held, stored by and controlled by a third party, just in case. It's just better that way. And when you realize that these third party intermediaries aren't essential for basic functionality for everyday consumer technology, whether that's video or messaging or file sharing or identity management or payments, you start to wonder, like, what good are you? Why am I using you? And if we can like opt out and like we do with the Impervious browser it starts to embolden and empower the individual. So I know I was going down the impervious rabbit hole, but I think it's important because it's all intertwined. The mission's there, and we see ourselves as building on Satoshi's vision, which might sound like cheesy to some, but it's literal. I mean, what was the name of the paper? It was a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And we were very deliberate. I was very deliberate in the language we used, not saying decentralized, which is a little bit in the eye of the beholder. It can be, what is it? Is it fractal distribution of data? Is it third-party distribution of keys? Like, I don't know. But peer-to-peer is a little clearer. And the peer-to-peer internet, like something we've been saying for a while, it says, get your money off third-party exchanges. Well, get your data off the equivalent of third-party data exchanges. These third-party applications and services, even if they're good actors, service a honeypot. So using Impervious and standardizing the peer-to-peer internet, letting you control your identity, which is a big part of what we build on, and decentralized identity and decentralized identifier communication network, DIDCOM, that we developed, allows you to bridge those moats that we were talking about, because identity is one of those aspects for the technology companies that they use to keep you in their walled gardens, in their silos, and to make it so you're dependent, like they say, helpless, dependent, and vulnerable. So yeah, I hope we build freedom tech and empowerment tech. So I'll pause there for a second.
Needless to say, the Impervious and Impervious browser team and TVP have a lot of philosophical alignment.
It's your show.
Hey, Chase, I think you should definitely talk about decentralized identifier and how it nearly magically works in the Impervious browser, and how this is all derived from the Bitcoin stack.
I think we lost.
Did we lose him?
Yeah, he's close.
There he is. He's back.
Chase, I'm not sure if you heard that from.
Now everything dropped for a second.
Okay, no problem. I'll repeat.
I was suggesting that you talk just a bit further about what does decentralized identity mean in the Impervious browser context. Like, what I think is nearly magical in terms of the technology, and it's all derived from the Bitcoin stack. I think decentralized identifiers, decentralized identity is new for a lot of people. And when you realize you're operating in the Impervious browser and, I can cryptographically prove that I'm the author of this content, for me, it is magical. So I think people just really need to hear more about that possibility.
Sure. And so if we take a step back to build on that, you can think of Impervious. So we build the tools and infrastructure for the peer-to-peer internet. Our primary application for that is the Impervious browser. It's a unification of a whole bunch of capabilities. So peer-to-peer tools for communication, data transfer, like file sharing, payments, identity management, like Christopher was talking about, and Bitcoin Lightning payments, all built into the world's first Bitcoin Lightning native web browser. So the reason we chose a web browser is because the browser already serves as essentially a de facto virtualized operating system. It's where you spend a majority of your time when you're not in these centralized third-party applications like Zoom and Google Hangout and Telegram or playing video games. You're in the browser. So demonstrating that you can use peer-to-peer technology and that most of these services function just fine, peer-to-peer or without centralized control and issuance. It's refreshing and it's startling at the same time. So let's give you an example. So what's the first thing you need when you log into or you initiate a Zoom call or to open a Gmail account or a social media account? You need a centrally assigned and issued identity. Now, the permissions and controls associated with that identity are going to determine the access and the use to that specific network. Now, that network is typically a subnetwork that's not interoperable with other systems. So the Impervious browser and its underlying tools are built on what we call the Peer Internet Standard, like I said, built in Satoshi's vision, where the identity and access to the systems isn't issued and determined by centralized third-party intermediaries, but by the users themselves. So a core component of this is DIDs, decentralized identifiers, and DIDCOM. So DIDs, decentralized identifiers, they enable basically interoperable, permissionless platforms and portable identity. So it allows individuals basically to control their identity without centrally issued ID, without relying on email or phone numbers like Signal does. And then you can publish those decentralized identities to something like ION, which is a layer 2 for the Bitcoin blockchain. It's a universally resolvable registry for identity. So you can be universally discoverable and resolvable or we support both ION and private peer DID. So in a peer DID, it's like an unpublished designation of how you'd like to send and receive information. Here's my port. Here's my Bitcoin Lightning node. Where it is, it's designated in there privately. So Impervious integrated DIDs into the browser as the foundation for our messaging system, DIDCOM. I know I'm getting a little technical, but it's an entirely new way to approach data communication. So we integrate basically what we support. Impervious, we are what's known as data transport agnostic. We're providing discretion on routing and how you send, receive, and access data, but we support four transport mechanisms: HTTPS, WebSockets, Bitcoin Lightning, and WebRTC, and then there will be more. Those are just the first four. But what that allows you to do, and once you pair with decentralized identifiers, again, this is all under the hood, right? You can associate that with a known social account, or it can be totally private, right? Or discovered on some public registry. But it allows you to basically remove the arbitrary gatekeepers and barriers to sending and receiving information. So imagine I call in from a Zoom call. So typically I call into Zoom, you call into Zoom. We meet up on Zoom servers. So they issue the encryption keys and they conduct the media mixing. So best case scenario, at a minimum, we are assuming their servers are available and that's accessible from either our jurisdiction or they're up and running and they're granting us access. Worst case, we're hoping that they're good actors and they're not sharing the encryption keys, which they absolutely, in every jurisdiction which they ostensibly are required to operate. So encryption keys are held, and then they're compelled by third-party authorities for various, basically not just intelligence purposes, but for legal proceedings and other reasons. So typically we depend on these third parties for access, for privacy, and for facilitation of calls. With Impervious and using DIDs, I can call basically Christopher using HTTPS. You can call in Bitcoin Lightning. You can act and use Bitcoin Lightning as a signaling command and control layer. Matt can call in via WebSockets. We can all just peer-to-peer, unencrypted data never leaves your machine. And we're unthrottled, uncompressed, not buffered. We can connect without a third party surveying, controlling us, censoring, and its performance doesn't have to, or I should say privacy doesn't have to come at the sake of performance. In fact, you're going to have higher frame rates, better resolution, and more stability if you don't have to you don't have to buffer, you don't have to compress, and you don't have to rely on a third party to facilitate. So we're excited about it. And once you create that cryptographically secure data transmission channel, so once I'm connected from me to you, my machine to yours, it's almost arbitrary what bytes are flowing through, right? Like that byte can represent an image, it can represent video, it can represent audio, it can represent a file, it can represent text. And so we almost had to work backwards to say, hey, okay, we're creating these peer-to-peer data transmission channels. We're layering DIDCOM, so you can do all kinds of cool things. You can circumvent what's known as asymmetric and get around firewalls. And you can have offline push notifications, so you can communicate without the need to be actively connected and just sitting there waiting for a call to come in like you're on a Zoom call. So you can actually use it as a viable alternative to existing systems. So yeah, there's all kinds of cool stuff going on. So I'll touch on asymmetric now real quick. Like in the Western world, those are basically set up so they allow outgoing signaling, but incoming signaling is blocked. So you can't get DDoS, your firewall, and your network hijacked. But that creates an issue where you can only asymmetrically send basically the signaling layer. Using DIDCOM, we allow you to send basically 2 EP streaming data packets connected and be cryptographically secured while circumventing firewalls without opening a whole bunch of unnecessary ports like we've seen some other peer-to-peer tools do using universal plug and play. Big no-no is to use universal plug and play, 5 to 10 ports, compromise your entire network and have any unsecured devices on your network potentially become part of the goddamn drone army and just malware. So not going to name any names, but that's how the rest of the world operates. So DIDCOM enables us to open up just what you need while maintaining network security and device security. So yeah, we're pretty psyched.
I would say all of that, which to make the future happen involves the cunning, skillful use of very deep engineering. But everything that he was just talking about works in a browser that you will intuitively know how to do all of the other things that you do. You can open up a tab and browse Twitter or wherever it might be, log into your email, but you also have all of these bits that are right there in the Impervious context so that you can do things. And the part that I wanted to underscore and bring home about the browser that I think is just so cool, if you go back to, I think, 1992 when Eric Hughes wrote the Cypherpunk Manifesto. What he talked about, no small part, was privacy is the ability to expose exactly what you want the world to know about you, and then having the flexibility to always retain the rest of it truly private. That is essentially gone to date with the internet, the way that everything is corporately controlled and siloed. The idea that we get our identity from some government or a corporate entity anywhere other than ourselves, if you think about it for a while, it's truly bizarre. And so to be able to author an identity, maybe it's a NIM if you choose, that NIM through the Impervious browser and the use of DIDs could specifically cryptographically sign using that identity some important piece of context. And no one in the rest of the world has to know that it was Christopher Calicott or Matthew Snow or Chase Perkins that authored it. That's very powerful. And maybe to date in the West and the United States, we've taken the First Amendment for granted, wrongly so to some degree. But in other places where you would be a dissident for speaking freely, this is absolutely critical technology for the future of human civilization that we want to live in. And so I am absolutely pumped for the Impervious browser. And I really appreciate the technical overview. Just want to make sure that everyone realizes that you do not have to be techy to use this, which is what makes it kind of magic.
Absolutely. So making it consumer friendly, it was definitely the goal. And any familiarity, we want to hear consumer technology and applications, messaging, Zoom. People know what video calls are. People know how to use the internet. People know how to search and browse and share a document and edit in Google Docs. So emulating that, but that's where the familiarity ends, because the magic under the hood is very unlike the rest. But everything, what you were just saying, Christopher, about identity, it's so imperative. You think about the Federalist Papers, they were pseudo-anonymous, Publius. And we understood at the beginning, if you're going to risk life, liberty, property, your family, your position, there is a time and a place to be able to disclose not just who you are and for what reason you're participating, but also it's something that can be weaponized against you, as we've seen domestically and abroad. So ability to control that identity, but most importantly, not allowing third parties being dependent. Like I said at the beginning, we've become basically creatures of big tech, right? And dependents and subjects of digital tyranny, in the sense where your identity, your access, permission, and use of networks does not have to be dictated by third parties. And in fact, if they were to turn that off, I think there's so many negative incentive structures around identity. There's a genuine concern pandering to, let's say, not just the whims and wishes, but seeking preferential treatment from those in power that control these third platforms and systems. It's all well and good. And some people cheer on Elon, just a topical example, and some people are upset. And whether the specific example is rational for them and their reaction, it's really seated in a deeper fear, which is you need your guy in power in order to participate in a way without fear, without reprisal and recourse, which is an absurd way to go about existing. And so when you introduce decentralized identifiers and you empower the individual to control their identity publicly, privately, pseudo-anonymously, I think so many of these incentive structures where people genuinely have a fear, whether it's or not, that, hey, I have invested in this network. These are my friends. This is how I communicate. This is how people know who I am. This is where I've invested years of my life. And if that were to be arbitrary, censored, cut off, throttled, shadow banned, whatever, that can affect you. And then of course you have the other side where people are incentivized to just circumvent you. Instead of trying to persuade you, they just coerce you and they go around to the third parties that are controlling these plaques. So by removing those tools, it's like power is always abused, and any tools that a centralized party has at some point will most likely be at a minimum tempted to be utilized, if not exploited. And by removing the cryptographic keys and identity, instead of being dependent on that centralized issued identity, but importing your identity, if you choose to participate in these other networks, it's difficult to explain how significant approach that is. And then I think as a society, we're going to feel less vulnerable and compromised, and it will be less controversial and consequential if there is some type of negative specific subnetwork issue, because the data will keep flowing around it, outside of it, and interoperate. And these specific subnets that may block you, or the lunatics that their ears will bleed, if they hear something they don't agree with, just won't be as big of a deal. And in fact, the free market, the incentive structure around sub networks that have basically less use and utility will diminish. So we can change from the ground up by empowering the individual. And another point here real quick, we view individual data privacy as the foundation for both consumer protection, or I should say consumer protection, the open internet, and even national security related infrastructure issues. Like, you're never going to secure the whole, the body populace. You're never going to secure infrastructure or protect consumer data without individual data privacy. And the best way to do that is to control how you send, receive, and access information, both the identity, the routing of information, and the storage. And the fundamentals right. It transmogrifies the landscape, provides new opportunities, and it also creates a more secure, sound society. And we get back to those fundamental principles that our nation was based on: protection of individual rights, recognition of private property, limited government. But most importantly, you can live without arbitrary fear, like we're in mainland China, and you look the wrong way and your social credit score changes, which is intentional, right? Living through intimidation is like the mafia. So
You guys touched on so many excellent points there. I don't even know where to begin, but I'll say this. One is your Christopher, Matt, Chase, your passion and your dedication to this is clear and it's infectious. And we're so glad to have you on the right side of history here.
Thanks. TVP is playing for keeps. There's some important stuff going on in the world, and products like the Impervious browser are pathways to achieving that future that we absolutely can't be without.
And I would add, Milton Friedman would always talk a lot about voting with your feet. If any of you aren't using the browser right now, if you go to Impervious, you can download right now and switch all your web traffic. And it's a small thing, but it is a vote. It is a vote of saying, I don't really like the way that Google and other big tech platforms are censoring us and what they do with the info. And I don't have to support that passively all the time. Obviously, when you buy Bitcoin, you're voting with your wallet. If you move to a different state or country, you're voting with your feet. But look, we're all going to be on the internet 24/7. Why don't we voice that vote? It's pretty important. And it's just nice that over time, we begin shifting all of our actions. But going from a fiat company and then now working for a Bitcoin only company, it's like pretty cool. It's like, oh, well, I was already buying Bitcoin and reading about it and trying to support it. But now literally everything in my life, every action I'm doing, it's already supporting Bitcoin, or I'm thinking in the back of my head how I can reorient it to do that. And the joke is, at the end of the day, we all work for the coin.
definitely. And something you just spoke to, Matt, it's not a little thing, but it is a little thing as far as effort wise, right? When you start normalizing that behavior and you go, okay, and again, the function of the browser was to have all these capabilities in one place, and then we're going to build out from there, out and up, right? And integrate third-party applications, continue to build our own capabilities along with a whole bunch of other stuff, and have like a marketplace. But when you realize like, wow, just the concept of an email, right? Your email, Gmail, if you're using Gmail, which I know the good people in the audience certainly aren't, but it is surveyed, and it's ad revenue, and it's used for targeting ads, and the whole surveillance capitalism model. So when you start normalizing messaging, when you go, hey, I don't need to get on a Zoom call. I value my privacy. I value my family, my customers, my business. Use Impervious, have peer-to-peer and encrypted calls privately for an unlimited period of time with better performance. Like, you start normalizing this and you go, what good are you? Like, if you go to attach a file instead of dropping in your email or giving it to a third-party server, how do you just connect one machine to another? Cryptographically secure, fast, and you don't have to worry about data duplication. It's like a cleansing. It's like, it's not just good data hygiene, but it's best practices where you go, it's almost like getting off social media for a little while. You come back, you go, well, how was I doing that? You have to recalibrate your routine. So we're really excited about it, but those little steps can make a big difference. And then tonight we have a big release, 0.4.8. We've pushed something like 17 updates in the last 40 days, but this is probably our biggest update. Performance, memory, capability, messaging, video, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then user functionality and features, we're pushing them out really quickly. So it'll go out via auto update. So if you already have the browser, you'll receive it tonight. And if not, you can just download it directly. But we're really excited about the direction of it. We partners at TVP, Christopher, Matt, Dustin, and Zach. And thanks for having this on your spaces, not just, again, we're not building this for us. We're building it for the future that we'd like to see. And that requires everyone else's participation. So if we can normalize this, we can spread the word. Hey, look, it's integrated with Bitcoin Lightning. You can use it both for the routing, signaling, command and control of data. You can use it for payments, and you can use it it's an optionality. You're not dependent on it. So your mom can use it, your friends, they don't need to know anything about Bitcoin Lightning. It is the proverbial first sip where all the functionality exists without Bitcoin Lightning, but you can take it to the next level and control the routing and add a payment layer to everything you do natively into the web browser. Let's put it like this. If NFTs can take off, so can some basic privacy and streaming payments with every activity you have that's censorship and surveillance resistant and universally resolvable. So that's my pitch.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think one thing you touched on earlier, Chase, that I think is really key for people to wrap their heads around is we at Coinbits have a very similar motive to what you guys are building at Impervious, in that we want Bitcoin to be accessible to all. You guys want the privacy features that Impervious allows to be accessible to all. We have that same shared ethos with you on that front. Now, one thing I think when you went into the technical discussion of how Impervious works versus perhaps some existing browsers for sure, and perhaps some other quote unquote decentralized identities, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. So most people in this space, and maybe listeners later, don't necessarily know how the internet works. I'm one of those people. Let's be honest. My browser is my gateway to the internet. I couldn't explain to you TCP/IP or HTTP. For people like that, and for the everyday non-Bitcoiners, which I think is your next frontier of potential users, how would you be able to differentiate? If I go on Google right now and I type in decentralized identity, there is an onslaught of ads. There are a number of quote unquote Web3 projects. Ethereum.org shows up in this list, which, what a joke. So for the everyday common people who barely know what the internet is, again, myself included, I'm not throwing any shade at anybody here. How do you bridge that gap in knowledge to people who perhaps live in a quote unquote Western democracy where it's not China, it's not you look at the wrong thing or share the wrong message and all of a sudden you can't go eat?
Absolutely.
How do you bridge that gap in knowledge?
So I would say two things. I think the first one is you think of the Impervious browser, it's less about the third-party websites than it is a vehicle that has a suite of other peer-to-peer tools. So you don't have to leave it to get in Zoom. You don't have to go to WhatsApp. You don't have to go to Google Docs. So just like email and Google captured like the work suite, that's what we're doing, but for consumer technology. So it's like, hey, normalize, you don't need to go to Google, but it's not just about google.com. It's about G Suite, right? It's about email. It's about Google Hangouts, about Microsoft Teams. So you start normalizing that. And before I get to number two, and then in the browser side, it's de-Firefox in the sense that we ripped out all like the tracking components. We don't collect data and crash reporting. So we basically made a cleaner version. And it was important to use Firefox or one of the major browsers, but we don't want to be Chromium based because we need to support extensions, right? So there's a whole bunch going on there. But if you know how to use a web browser, there's no reason you can't use Impervious. There's just a suite of tools built in. Now, decentralized identifiers are natively built in. So when you install the application and run it, it's generated locally on your device. We generate a recovery kit. You share it locally. We can't help you recover it. And this allows you to control, like Tori was saying, you can designate who you are. You can publicly post it. You can privately share it. You can connect it to a Twitter account. It just depends on the use case. But the most important thing is instead of getting on, and this is the second part, when you said, how do you talk to people that are less technical? We covered a lot of grounds, but I think the function of this is pretty simple. One of the highest demand demographics we had was non-technical over 50 or 55. And the reason for that is people may not understand Facebook, right? They don't understand, well, a lot of things, but they understand that Mark Zuckerberg and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and the Jeff Bezos of the world disproportionately control their access permission use. And you see this most viscerally in the political cycle where it's not relevant until it is, right? It's not relevant until everyone's stomping their feet and demanding one of these third-party centralized parties intervene in some way. And so we go, hey, look, you remove the tools, you remove the capability of these third-party intermediaries to intervene. And this is really important. So I think the example we like to give is 100 years ago at the formation, the telecom networks, the telecom system, everyone knows the towing system, we decided that we would be what's designated as common carriers. So that's a utility. We knew 100 years ago, we wanted the machines to work for us, not against us. But most importantly, we didn't want the Bell Souths of the world at the time, AT&T, to be able to say, hey, look, for what function, who are you calling? Are you calling? What's the substance of the call? Are you in good standing? Have you violated terms of service? Have you violated the use of this platform before? The common carriers, the telecoms, don't have discretion and control whether they want to connect a sender to receiver. They just have to. We decided that instead we were going to be a nation of laws and to classify and actually make it so if you break the law using the infrastructure, you actually break a number of additional laws and federal crimes. So it was a nation that in line with our physical reality, one of punishment, not prevention. So if you want to give someone an example, go, hey, look, Impervious is a new infrastructure, which for the signaling, for the messaging, for the sending and receiving information, for communicating, instead of FaceTime, instead of Zoom, you can control how you send and receive data. You control your information, where it's stored, when and how. And there's no third party taking a copy of it. There's no Mark Zuckerberg or USPS to photocopy it or arbitrarily censor it. It's between you and the other party. That doesn't immunize you from the rule of law. You don't magically, but what it does is it restores those fundamental principles, due process, protection from unreasonable search and seizure. Instead of great kill switch and dragnet surveillance, it's, hey, look, if there's an abuse of the system, you need to go to the party that's abusing it. But what you don't do is make if the telecom system was introduced today, we would almost absolutely abstain from the idea of a common carrier because everyone wants an exception. Right? Well, there's a lot of reasons we wouldn't want X, Y, and Z to work or to call. And no, I mean, it's the rule of law. And if you punish it or if you abuse it, there are consequences. So think of Impervious as a new infrastructure to using the internet to control your data, identity, payments, and comms.
Awesome foundational answer there. That's really good to know. I'm going to bring us back a little bit to so we started this conversation with coin entrepreneurship and we took a really good deep dive. For those who are just joining us, we took a really deep dive into Impervious as an example of Chase being a Bitcoin entrepreneur and Christopher and Matt from TVP here describing their look from a venture perspective at potential Bitcoin entrepreneurs. Now, I'd like anybody can answer this and I'd really be curious to hear all your thoughts. There's a lot of opportunity obviously in Bitcoin. And I think the example you gave earlier, Chase, of like, hey, we're going to build this anyway in your initial conversations with TVP. What does Bitcoin white space look like for you guys now? Like where, if there are people here looking at starting their own companies or building on top of Bitcoin, see the most prominent white spaces that require building, that need immediate infrastructure built.
So the
Look,
first, if you don't want to jump in real quick, Christopher, sorry. This is something we haven't touched on. So we said we're based on the peer-to-peer internet, and on DIDComs. But something that's really important is we're entirely open source and anyone build on our infrastructure today. Now, we can get into some specific areas and I have some personal preferences that I see a lot of opportunity in a lot of areas like gaming and content creation and streaming paid content. But ultimately, you don't have to wait for whatever Web 5 is going to be. And I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying like, I don't know because I haven't used it, or Block's approach. And I think very highly of Daniel Buckner and I like Jack's team. All I know is what we have today. We open sourced it. We built it on infrastructure that we're behind because that's what our applications are built on and anyone can build on it today. So I would say start exploring. Christopher and Matt, we should probably have another hackathon because the one we had a summer ago was really cool. And yeah, so I'd like to see them kind of the market and depending on these different geopolitical dynamics and jurisdictions may guide some of that, but you don't have to wait. Anywhere you might like streaming payments, streaming content, peer-to-peer messaging, anything like that, file transfer, or you can augment it into existing tools and services. So implementing and integrating into existing tools. So it's like you can build from the ground up or you can drop in peer-to-peer into existing applications. And the marketplace we're going to be introducing is specifically for those third parties. So I don't want to dictate entirely. Happy to guide, but some of this is selfish. What I want to see a lot more gaming. But yeah, go ahead, Christopher. Sorry to cut you off.
No sweat. Look, it's all white space. If you think about it, because one of the empowerment layers is literally Lightning. And we're only in the very early innings of Lightning playing out in terms of channel capacity. If you take, it's a little bit of a forced comparison, I recognize that. But if you just take a broad brush and compare the Lightning network in terms of channel capacity through the whole network as we understand it against something in other ecosystems in quote unquote crypto, like wrapped Bitcoin, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin sitting perilously in a smart contract somewhere, anything that we want to build, we have a lot of validated markets out there. And I'm not new to Bitcoin. And so sometimes my perspective is a little bit different than some people maybe been around for a few years, and that's okay. We've said for a very long time, go break something elsewhere. Just don't break Bitcoin, don't break the money. And if you, by the way, if you happen to find a massive validated market, of course, we'll figure out how to build that directly on Bitcoin. And so that's the context to say this. I mean, for me, the most obvious problem, if I was to go and form a company and build right now as an operator with the emergence of Taro on Lightning and other enablers of things like a price stable asset. If you think about a US dollar pegged price stable asset or stable coin directly on the Bitcoin protocol stack, what does that actually enable? Well, I'm not suggesting you become a primary issuer, although maybe you want to do that. It is business to be had there. Decentralized exchange as an idea has not, as of today, taken place for the very first time directly on Bitcoin. That is an absolutely huge opportunity. And it's not just because decentralized exchange is a big opportunity in its own right, and it is. It's because the entire world in this macro environment currently consists of sovereigns that do one of two things. They issue their own currency and they need to buy dollars on the open market for global trade, and they end up experiencing high inflation. Or they decide to dollarize and they take the smart approach and they just use dollars. So to be able to use the Bitcoin stack to express dollar related price stability globally is actually counterintuitively a boon for the dollar over the short term, but it also very cunningly means that dollars are sitting right next to sats in 3 or 4 generation old smartphones around the world. And to be able to get some of these, we'll call them lightning dollars for a lack of a better word, and then suddenly buy non-KYC Bitcoin in places like, I don't know, Zaire or Zambia or in Venezuela or in an adversarial nation to the West. All of those ideas are extremely powerful and absolutely massive. So it's easy to gloss over the impact. I see this truly Bitcoin native decentralized exchange, given the current global macro environment, as an absolute watershed for what's coming next. Because once you have price stability native to the Bitcoin stack, a whole lot of other market opportunities also open up. So that's my one. Please go build it. It's not easy, but build it and come talk to TBP, and we'll see about backing you.
Amazing. Very good. Thank you so much. And we're getting ready to finish up our conversation here. I just got a couple more questions for the folks on the speaker panel here. If you guys have any additional questions, please feel free to use the bottom right-hand corner on your Twitter app comment section. That will allow me to see what the questions are and ask them. But let me drive us towards a conclusion here with this conversation. We've been going for an hour and a half, and welcome late joiners. This conversation is being recorded, and there's been so many awesome nuggets of information that you could take away from it. If you missed the beginning, go back and listen, and we'll also make this available as a podcast. Now, let me ask you guys this question. So, if maybe we'll start with Chase. So, if there are people who are listening to this or will listen to this that want to start to build on Bitcoin, they have an idea, they have a potential end state in mind, and they want to get started, what kind of practical steps or advice do you have for people like that? I guess from the founder side, and then maybe Matt and Christopher, you could comment on it from a venture perspective.
Sure. I'll keep it short and sweet, where I think there are 2 approaches that would be really helpful. The first is to consider using DIDs and DIDCOM. Again, all open source. We spent almost 2 years refining it. So it's on GitHub, and I would encourage you to consider incorporating that into any tool that you develop or that you're considering, not just because of the privacy benefits and the interoperability and the censorship resistant and the user centric control, but it's going to make it interoperable. Whatever you're building, it's going to enable you to bridge those moats and those gaps to other tools and services and a potentially much more significant user base just right out of the gate. So you're not just another subnet. And without DIDs, you tend to just be another subnet. It might be a permissible subnet, but it's not interoperable, and it's not an interoperable standard. And the next is like, just scour over the open source code. There are companies like Impervious and many others that have been releasing it. You don't have to start from scratch. I think that's one of the coolest parts about the Bitcoin community is that we're really serious. It's not just hand waving about including everyone else. And it's a mission which is, it's self-fulfilling with participation. So it's both a necessity for our success, but it's quite literally an all ships rise the tide, where the more code that's out and the more capability that's normalized and the easier it is to adopt that. But there's a lot of cool stuff. So look at the open source code, consider DIDs and DIDCOM, and get moving.
Fantastic, Chase. That's really good advice and very practical steps people can take if they want to build. Christopher, Matt, what about from a venture side? What advice would you have for founders or potential founders who want to participate in building on Bitcoin?
I'll go first. I would say the one thing that I see that is, and again, I'm a tale of technology. At the end of the day, venture capital is about markets. It's about identifying and seizing the opportunity that's in a gap of a potentially nascent, but exponentially growing market segment. And I think Bitcoin plays in the market for money, which is the mother of all markets. And so there's so many different applications and ways you can go. I always encourage founders to really go to first principles. Don't start with technology and then try to work your way back toward a market opportunity. Start with primary research, talk with people, try to validate a hypothesis and take that approach toward starting any kind of company. And by the way, that applies whether we're talking about Bitcoin startups, or any kind of startup for that matter. And so I think I always feel like I'm not hearing enough about, we talked to 75 people of this profile and here's what we learned, because that's the thing. That's the test. Like, what did you learn in these kind of discussions and this hypothesis testing? And so real simple. It's a first principle. Start with what you believe to be an asymmetrical market opportunity for yourself. Don't worry about your investors. It's our job to also assess that. But if you're taking career risk to focus the next 10 or 12 or 15 years of your life on one company, you want to know and have deep conviction that is the single place you should be focused for that duration. So that'd be my answer. Focus on markets.
Yeah. And I'll just put a plug in here. We actually started testing out this month doing office hour Fridays. So if you're exploring, want to build something and you're not totally sure yet, a lot of times people are in that phase. Reach out, same handle here on Twitter, Telegram, emails matt@tvp.fund. But yeah, I really do agree with Christopher, and I've learned a lot from him on how important it is to do this market research. It's easy when you're building to think that you've got the world's perfect thing, but ultimately you got to serve your customers. So you got to talk to them and get their feedback and constantly iterate. And the nature of Bitcoin self-custody is complex UI, UX, and there's a lot going on. Even to just have the knowledge it takes to buy Bitcoin, there's a lot that went into that journey of the person who buys their first $20. So there's a lot of opportunity here if you're design focused and want to solve that UI UX problem without compromising on the principles like Impervious does. There's a lot of opportunity to do that.
Amazing, really awesome advice. And I think we've covered so much ground. So for those who are just joining us here recently, this conversation was recorded. We've talked with Impervious.ai founder Chase, and we've talked with TVP Funds, Christopher and Matt Snow. We've covered so much. There's so many different topics. We covered how venture capital works high level, how Bitcoin focused venture capital is perhaps different than typical venture capital, what due diligence processes take place, and where to play as a potential Bitcoin entrepreneurs. And we did a deep dive into Impervious AI and looking at the web browser and looking at how it's different than the existing world order of giving out your identity for the service of the internet. So we've covered so many topics, and I'm hoping that if you're joining here recently and missed the beginning, that you go back and listen and share this conversation, because there's so many awesome nuggets of information here that, Christopher, Chase, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time. Recently, I've been asking to all our space guests and speakers, and I would welcome your thoughts on it as people who are so far in the trenches that this is probably not even this is not even a topic that's top of mind for you. But hey, perhaps some of our listeners here are going through their first bear market. What tips do you have, or a tip that you have to survive maybe your first bear market as a newly coined Bitcoiner?
Some people say that HODL stands for hold on for dear life. Look, there's cyclicality in these markets, and until Bitcoin achieves market capitalization that represents the global GDP or somewhere in that range, we'll still have some. That's okay. It's actually a great opportunity. I think I've been told that it's on some level somehow comforting that people like me and my partner Dustin to hear how they're thinking about it. And again, you had a financial disclaimer at the beginning. This is not advice, but sometimes it's better to ask an investor what they're doing versus what they think. And I can tell you, we've all been personally buying Bitcoin lately. I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store right now. Like I said earlier in the show, I was able to take down some Bitcoin for just under 16K. I never thought this would happen again. So it's okay. This is all part of the process. If there wasn't volatility, it would be because it had largely achieved the capitalization where we're going. Volatility is a process, part of the process of price discovery. And so take heart and don't worry.
I'll say I'm a much newer Bitcoiner than probably a lot of people here. I didn't really super begin to understand the picture until 2019, but I've seen the full gamut at multiple areas from 3K to 69K. And I will never forget the day it dropped down to 3K and I looked at the screen and I had to look myself in the mirror and say, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't understand this. And at that moment, I made a decision. I would rather ride this to zero. If I was wrong for something I really don't get, and I don't see why this would happen, I'd rather ride it to zero and permanently learn the life lesson because I know what the upside is if I'm right. And holy shit, am I happy I didn't sell. So that was the lesson. And then just look, for bear markets, sometimes people realize that they were overdoing it. If you can try and live your life, not do credit card debt, try not have too much other debt, and don't do loans if you don't have to, and just slowly DCA into cold storage where you hold the keys. Like, it's a meme, stay humble, stack sats, but it's so true. And that I think I permanently internalized this lesson of just like low time preference, try to be modest with your life and still have fun and just slowly push that number up. We don't have to everyone doesn't need 50 BTC potentially with them to be loaded, right? It's like, if we're going to reprice most of the world, like just having a good little stack. There's not enough Bitcoin in the world, old numbers. There's not enough Bitcoin for everyone in the world with a net worth over 100,000 USD to acquire 0.15 coins. So that's pretty feasible for a lot of people. And even if it's going to take a few years, it's feasible to get there. You can hold your keys the whole time. You could live a little bit more modest life. Don't get into trouble with debt and you'll be good.
Hidden mine. Sorry, guys and girls.
And to give the founder's perspective, or at least this founder's perspective, I think bear markets, especially one that seems to have rapidly deteriorated, depending on the direction you're thinking of it. Only weeks ago, FTX at $32 billion valuation existed. There was a lot of hype, a lot of interest, kind of setting what I think a few people would think. Again, TVP, Dustin Trammel, and Christopher, some of the first Bitcoiners in the world. And then you look at FTX, you go, wow, but in 4 years, they built 32 billion. And you go, fundamentals matter, principles and mission matter. And so whether it's Celsius or BlockFi, or I don't want to throw stones or kick someone when they're down, or FTX, I think from a perspective of optimism as a founder, where if you keep chugging along, it's incredible. There's so many hard tech, Bitcoin, peer-to-peer technology companies that are being built. And despite some of these like other valuation distractions or seeking alpha and seeking kind of quick returns, if the fundamentals are right, this is a great time where there's a lot less noise and a lot less distraction, and you actually can attract some really great partners, some really great talent. And everyone, it's like in the larger VC space, in the early tech or early VC space, everyone says, oh, everyone just pivoted to like very hard tech, right? Like space tech and AI and hand waving AI. And I think the same is true in our industry, where there's a lot of distraction and hand waving. And this is a great time to build systems and tools that matter and pursue something you care about that's on mission, because the other things are either fizzling or who knows, you might chug along and just outlive them. So good luck and Godspeed.
Awesome. That's all really very sound advice. When Christopher, apologize. made his note about world GDP. I don't think I've heard Bitcoin market cap being related to the world's GDP number before. So I did a quick search to look it up, and this is bullish. The nominal GDP in 2021 for the world was $96.1 trillion. So we've got early. We've got a long way.
Look at the global bond market, global financial derivatives. Think about a world in which without fiat monetary policy being super loose, you don't have an artificial monetary premium on real estate and private and public equities. So we've got a long ways to go. We got a lot of work ahead of us, but there's a whole lot of garbage to reprice.
I mean, look, I think where we're going over a long enough time scale doesn't make sense anymore to think about Bitcoin in terms of dollars as a denominator. And that's just my view. I would love to meet those who are more bullish than myself because I need some inspiration, clearly.
Well, I only bring this up and I only looked up the number because every Friday I try to play this song to announce the weekend and send people off on their weekend, at least on the East Coast here in the US. And Christopher, when you brought that comment up, it was a perfect segue for me to play our famous Bitcoin and Chill Friday songs. Take a listen.
Nice.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
I gotta tell you guys, it's been an awesome time chatting with you. Thank you so much for being gracious to us with your time. And for those joining late, this conversation was recorded. It will be available on Twitter as soon as we end here. And take a look at Coinbits. Coinbits is one of the best ways to orange pill your family and friends. Very similar to Impervious, we had the mission of making Bitcoin accessible to the masses. And we have a Bitcoin roundup feature. It takes your change from everyday purchases, taxes, your low time preference spending, turns that into Bitcoin. So check it out, Coinbits.app. Chase, Christopher, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Do you guys have any shills that you want to last minute points for people to go follow you at? Obviously your Twitter handles, but any other point outs to send people to check out?
Yeah, thanks for that. I would just say, look, TVP wants to increasingly become a more and more interactive brand. And we would say, find us on our social channels, reach out to us in places like Telegram or LinkedIn, or certainly here on Twitter. And love to talk with you. I hope that there are future founders in this audience, and we would love to hear what you're building. And so please reach out. We should be the easiest people on earth to get in touch with.
And I'd like to give a little shout out to Coinbits. So thanks for hosting us and good luck. Mission matters. And to everyone listening, mission matters. And there's a lot of founders that live to serve just like TVP does. So we're psyched. Let's do some more of these and go check us out. New release coming out tonight. So from Impervious Browser 0.4.8. So talk soon, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a ton. This is great.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. And for those in the audience, if you don't have already Impervious downloaded, go download it. Impervious.ai. We talked a ton about how important it is to decentralize the internet and the mission that Chase spoke about earlier. So please go download it, go check it out. They need the feedback. They need the users. And it's a great way. It's a small step you can take to go further into Bitcoin and to build the orange future we all believe in. So go check it out, Impervious.ai. And with that, thank you so much, everybody, for your time and for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Have a good one.
Take it easy, guys. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. So what do you think of the conversation? Share your thoughts with us on Twitter @CoinbitsApp, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of our next episode release. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Bitcoin Roundup podcast.